Right, guys, just gonna run through the Indian Wars for you. I should cover pretty much everything in this recording, okay? So it'll be a bit longer, but will be useful. I will send this out on Teams as well. Okay, firstly, just again, overview. Remember how constantly throughout this topic, you've got agreed treaties then constantly being ripped up or broken by the US government. It leads to this whole distrust of dealing with each other. Right, we start with Little Crow's War in 1862. Remember, all of these wars, try and think of them as start, middle, and end, cause, events, consequence, and that's how I'm gonna kind of structure this. So again, be careful of putting this. Well, be very aware of putting this into a narrative. Right. So firstly, we have the issues with Little Crow being moved to the reservations in 1851. Remember, Little Crow's band is the Dakota Sioux. We're going to talk about the Sioux a lot, but there's loads of sub-tribes, the Lakota, the Dakota, etc. But this is Little Crow's band. Moves in 1851, gives up a huge amount of land, and in return for this 1.4 million payment and a yearly payment of 80,000, some in cash, some in provisions, so food, etc. Now, the Sioux had built up quite a lot of debt with traders in the past, like promising to pay them back, but never did. And this kind of gives the government an excuse to just not pay them that 1.4 million, and also to delay the yearly payments to them as well. You'll see this is a common theme in the lead up to this war. Plus the reservations that the Dakota Sioux had been moved onto were just really poor land. The Dakota Sioux found it very hard to survive in the winter. Some warriors left the reservations to hunt, which again gave the US government more excuse to withhold these payments and provisions. Now, the agency, remember, that's initially set up with Eli Parker to basically monitor the reservations, hand out food, hand out money, etc. The big issue here was a lot of them were corrupt, and this agency cheated the Sioux out of money and provisions, often charging a huge price for food that was often inedible. So on top of that, settlers start moving in and trying to take parts of the reservations for themselves, in particular the best farming land. So Sioux warriors who are getting quite desperate at this point started to break into agency warehouses to steal the provisions. You've also got the crop failures that lead to the Sioux starving, and the Civil War meant soldiers were in the east. So Little Crow actually sees this as a chance to take back provisions from these agency warehouses. So they're all the causes. There's a lot of causes in the build-up to this war. And then we'll have a look at what happens during it and what happens afterwards. So the events. Now, Little Crow, he attacks the warehouses to distribute the provisions to his people, his starving people, but the young warriors, they go out to attack the towns and the US forts, slaughtering around 600 settlers and US soldiers. Now, Little Crow wasn't happy with this. He said there were a lot of innocent people here, but the warriors, the Indian warriors, were they didn't even agree with removing to the reservations in the first place. They didn't have a lot of respect for the chiefs. Remember, the tribal structure is a lot different. It's not just the chief is in complete command. Remember. So Little Crow and his band, they have to retreat when the US troops return from the east, and the US citizens wanted basically the Sioux to be punished. This ends with 400 warriors being put on trial and sentenced to death without evidence, but President Lincoln kind of insists that only those who could be proven to have murdered and raped to be executed, which leads to 38 men being killed. So what happens to Little Crow? Well, the Sioux are moved to the Crow Creek Reservation, which was isolated with dry lands, and many of them die in the first winter, so brutal. And Little Crow himself, well, the bounties were paid for the scalps of the Sioux hiding in Minnesota. Sorry, a bit of a typo there. Little Crow was seen by a hunter. He was shot. The hunter cut off his scalp, and another man would chop off his head. So that's what happened to Little Crow. So really a bad end for the tribe. He conducted this out of desperation, and it ends with many of his people dying anyway in the Crow Creek Reservation, and him himself being killed. So a sad end. But this does have an impact on other wars because people are aware of what happens to Little Crow. The Sand Creek Massacre. So again, what happens? Well, and we can go back to 1851 again with the Fort Laramie Treaty, which guaranteed lands to the Arapaho and the Cheyenne. Now, as usual, a recurring theme in this topic is gold is discovered. So prospectors start making the way through that land, and they kind of demand the U.S. government move the tribes so they can access this gold more easily. Now, the Fort Wise Treaty of 1861 is signed, basically to move the Cheyenne and the Arapaho off the land in Colorado, basically freeing up the gold. But a lot of the young warriors, the Dog Soldiers, they reject the treaty. They remain on their old lands, and this leads to conflict with the prospectors. And fighting escalates between the army and the Dog Soldiers. So this will lead to a member of the Cheyenne, chief of the Cheyenne, to basically come up with a deal. Okay, the event itself. So Black Kettle, he's the Cheyenne chief. He attempts to make an agreement and sets up camp at Sand Creek. Now, he does this because he believes he's safe. He believes this is in agreement with the US government. However, the territory of Colorado, this is John Evans. Now, Evans wants to kill the Plains Indians. He sees them as hostile, and he appoints Colonel Chivington, who's a great Civil War hero, to do the job. This is Chivington. Now, on 29th November 1864, Chivington leads 700 cavalrymen to attack the Cheyenne village at Sand Creek. The chief, Black Kettle, he has his white flag and US flag both flying because he's got women and children with him, but Chivington charges in, massacres over 130 men, women and children. They're scalped, and they're scalped to kind of show that this band is dead, and Chivington kind of celebrates it as a victory. Chivington kind of claimed he killed over 1,000 warriors, but it's not true. This was a massacre, and Black Kettle manages to escape. So, the consequences of it. Well, Black Kettle escapes and he carries the news of the massacre. Dog Soldiers believe this was evidence that the whites couldn't be trusted, and they start attacking forts over Colorado. Now, the government's under pressure because they're fighting the Civil War, and they have to deal rather than send the soldiers over. So they need to kind of bide for time. So the government offers a new treaty which moves the Cheyenne and Arapaho to a large reservation in the south and give payments to the survivors of the massacre. However, once the Civil War is won, the US just go back on the deal. They move the tribes to smaller reservations and don't give out the compensations. Okay, so this will, remember guys, these videos are so you can pause and just read over the information as well. Okay, so use it both ways. Right, this kind of has an impact on Red Cloud's war because there is news of this massacre, and Red Cloud is somebody who really kind of wants to hold on to their way of life, and he sees it ending. Now, he's part of the sub-tribe, the Lakota Sioux, so again, another sub-tribe of the Sioux Nation. Right, so in 1862, again, it's gold. So gold is discovered in the Rocky Mountains in Montana. Miners used the Bozeman Trail to get there, and this cut right through the Sioux hunting grounds and broke the Fort Laramie Treaty of 1851, which sets out the territories for these nations. The government don't stop the miners, so the Sioux attack these travelers along the trail. Now, Red Cloud wants a meeting with the officials to basically sort this out, but as he goes to sort it out, he sees that the US are building forts all along the Bozeman Trail, and he basically realizes the US government aren't going to deal with him, or they're just going to lie as they previously have done. So he chooses to fight, and he's aware of what happened to Little Crow, so he chooses to fight. So what happens? Well, he actually gets support from two important individuals that you'll know about a bit later, Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse, and he gets around 3,000 warriors. They begin to attack the army, and they launch the Fetman's Trap, which is an old kind of tactic that many people have used throughout history, and the natives used it quite a lot, where you'd send in a couple of scouts, attract the attention of an enemy, run away, lead that troop into an ambush. And that's exactly what happened to Fetterman. The Sioux ambushed Captain Fetterman, and they basically massacred them all. The Red Cloud and his band, they then surround Fort Phil Kearny, and a peace commission has to come out and deal with it, because basically the Lakota Sioux aren't letting anybody out and anybody using the trail. Now, this leads to the Fort Laramie Treaty of 1868. So you need to know what this is. The Fort Laramie Treaty agrees to close the Bozeman Trail, and Red Cloud agreed to take his people to the reservation in Dakota. Now, the treaty recognizes that the Greatest Sioux Reservation of Dakota was exclusively for the Sioux Nation. Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse refused to sign, but importantly, if you look on the map, this includes the Black Hills of Dakota, which is sacred land to the Sioux Nation. This will become important in our next war. Fast forward to 1876, the Battle of Little Bighorn. So there's the Black Hills of Dakota, and as you're probably guessing, that's going to be a major spike in tension. So you've got firstly the Northern Pacific Railroad, which is getting closer to the Sioux land as it was built across. Now you've got General George Custer, who has his cavalrymen, and he's really his responsibility is to protect the railroad builders, but in reality he's actually looking for gold, and he finds it. Now, prospectors then come and join him to stake their claims to the land, and the government actually offers money to the Sioux Nation for the access to the hills and mineral rights, but the Sioux refuse, because remember, this is a part of their religion, this is part of their great spirit, the spirituality. And remember, the Second Fort Laramie Treaty actually secured that land for the Sioux Nation. And the whites were not meant to settle there or prospect for gold. But as we've seen, constantly throughout this, whites are constantly going back against the treaties that are being put out there. So in 1876, the Sioux are ready to fight, because prospectors are just piling into their land, and Chief Sitting Bull says, the whites want a war, we'll give them a war. Now, just before this, the Sioux they left their reservation to basically deal with these intruders, but the deep snow had actually made it hard to return. So when they were threatened with war to return back to their land, they couldn't because of the deep snows. And this leads to the US Army planning to attack. Now, it was a three-pronged attack, but one of those prongs is Custer, and that will become important in the actual events. Oops. So, the reality, sorry, I know I skipped over the last one, apologies. That was just the plan. You can just pause it and have a look at the plan. But the reality of the whole plan, which was this three-pronged attack, and the aim to destroy the Dakota Sioux, but they completely underestimated this band. There's not an effective liaison between the generals. That means communications. They didn't really find out how many Plains Indians there were, and they were quite well armed with Winchester repeating rifles, so this was not going to be an easy fight. So what happens? Well, Custer, he goes glory mad. He has 600 cavalrymen, but he decides to take 200 whilst the others are scouting around to attack the Sioux warriors. There's 2,000 of them. He just assumes that they'll be able to destroy them. Custer wants this glory, but it leads in an absolute massacre. Greatly outnumbered, all 200 men and Custer were killed. Right, so you might be thinking, well, you've ran over the events quite quickly, and that's because it's all about the consequences of this battle. It's where the big questions come up. So, what is the consequence? Well, first off, assimilate or die. Complete change in policy. Before this, Plains Indians were seen as ignorant, helpless savages, but now they're seen as a threat, and a threat to manifest destiny. This source here says it is time to quit this Sunday school policy and let Sheridan, the commander-in-chief, exterminate every Indian who will not remain upon the reservation. The best use to make of an Indian who will not stay on the reservation is to kill him. It is time that the dawdling, slow and aimless, maudlin, foolishly sentimental peace policy was abandoned. So, assimilate, become American, or die. That's the whole plan now. You also have previous treaties are completely scrapped. I mean, they were pretty much scrapped most of the time anyway, but the government decided Plains Indians had forfeited the right for treaty deals. Plains Indians had to just accept what they were given. That's move on to smaller reservations. And that if they didn't give up the Black Hills, the government would stop sending them food. The Sioux, faced with starvation, had to give up the Black Hills. Now, remember, you might be thinking, why didn't they just keep fighting? They were quite reliant on this food because the buffalo were being destroyed at this point. Their whole way of life is changing, and in a rapid time, you might be thinking, oh, why didn't they learn new skills and stuff like that? They tried. It was difficult. They were given rubbish land without the expertise to farm, and farming again is certainly in some tribe culture was completely against their way of life, destroying the land. So it was really problematic, and a lot of tribes were reliant on the food of the US government now. So the Indians must be kept on the reservations. They were pursued relentlessly. They ran out of food and ammunition. The Sioux and the Cheyenne went back to reservations, and within 5 years, almost all of them were confined to reservations and dependent on the US government for food and shelter. And finally, the Sioux's weapons were taken. They lived under basically military occupation. Forts were built, soldiers monitored them. This was complete control and a complete change in terms of circumstances. Yeah, this is the beginning of the end, unfortunately, for their way of life. So by the end of the 1880s, the natives are in despair. The government just keeps cutting the rations. Many are dying of starvation and all sorts. This leads them to desperation, and this leads to the ghost dance. So what was the ghost dance? Well, a poet, holy man called Vovoka claimed to have had a vision telling him that if Plains Indians rejected white ways of life and danced a sacred dance, the Great Spirit would bring all the dead Plains Indians back to life. To the US government, this looked like a war dance. So here's the song. Father, have pity on us. We are crying for thirst. All is gone. We have nothing to eat. Father, we are poor. The buffalo are gone. They are all gone. Take pity on us, Father. We are dancing as you wished, because you commanded us. We dance hard, we dance long. Have pity, Father, help us. You are close by in the dark. Hear us and help us. Take away the white men. Send back the buffalo. We are poor and weak. We can do nothing alone. Help us be what we once were, happy hunters of buffalo. Again, desperation. But it leads to another massacre, and this is at Wounded Knee in 1890. So let's have a look at what happens here. Well, the ghost dance spreads rapidly through the reservations, and the president orders the army in to take control. Now, during this, Sitting Bull is killed in an attempt to arrest him. Remember, some of the whites kind of see this as a war dance, so they see this as a threat. Sitting Bull's followers, they flee to the south, and the army catches up with them at Wounded Knee. Now, as a warrior is having his weapons taken from him, the others begin to dance, and in confusion, a shot is fired, and the 7th Cavalry then open fire, and in 10 minutes, 250 are dead. Yeah, Again, another sad state of affairs, another massacre, another stain on the legacy of white America. So, the reactions to it though. Well, public opinion was quite positive. The soldiers were praised, and the public saw it as revenge for Little Bighorn. It also showed that white Americans thought Plain Indians were too wild and hostile, and if they could not be controlled, they should be shot and killed. And the Indian frontier is now ended. There's nowhere now within the USA's borders that belongs to any other nation or people. And this is a photo that the soldiers took with their Indian bodies being buried. Yeah, that was the real end of conflict, the end of any clashes between the natives and the whites. This is Manifest Destiny completed. This is the end of the Indian Wars, and you really need to be thinking about the consequence of each war. You need to be thinking of the importance of each war on things like way of life for Plains Indians. You know, how it's at every step, their way of life has been changing, it's been taken away. That's the key to this topic. That's the way to access the question. Be really thinking about the impact this has on Plains Indians' way of life, and how each war leads to a change in government policy, especially the Battle of Bighorn. All right, so we've covered pretty much everything in those wars and those conflicts. So it is there for you guys to use. Again, I'll get up as many more sessions as I can. All right, bye.